everyone is so hard on ourselves. We're constantly berating ourselves for like, oh my gosh, why didn't you do this, JoAnn? Or why didn't you wake up early and get your workout in, JoAnn? You're so lazy. Or I can't believe that you lost it and yelled at your child. Like all these things we say to ourselves that like we would not accept anyone else saying to us. But this constant like flow of just insults really affects our mood and really brings us down. So like the first thing I'd suggest is to start looking to see, what am I saying to myself?
Welcome to the Soaring Child podcast, where parents of children with ADHD learn tips and tricks to help their child soar at home, at school, and in life. We feature interviews with experts, medical professionals, and parents just like you who are learning how to reduce ADHD symptoms using food and other natural strategies. Because children with ADHD deserve to soar just like every other child. I'm Dana Kay, your host. Hello, parents. Welcome to another edition of the Soaring Child podcast. I want to just sort of, before we get started, I want to take you back to the days of when I was struggling with my son's ADHD symptoms. And one of the things that I want to tell you a bit of a story. So I used to tell my husband that I don't like my son. I mean, I loved him, but I really, really didn't like him. And what that brought up for me was a huge amount of guilt. How could a mother say that about her own child? And I would go to bed at night feeling so guilty about the way that I treated him. I would wake up in the morning, firstly dreading what mood he was going to be in the day, what he was going to be like in the day. And I just was in this constant state of guilt. And we're today going to be addressing a topic that I am sure touches the lives of many, many mothers and fathers, maybe not so much fathers, but many mothers out there and all of you listeners. And that is definitely mum guilt. It's kind of like this invisible yet heavy burden that can, overshadow the joys of parenting. And really, when I was going through it, it made me feel isolated. It made me feel like I was the only mum out there that was having these thoughts. So I'm super excited today to welcome our expert talking about this topic. JoAnn Crohn is a parenting educator and life coach who helps mums feel confident in raising empowered kids while pursuing their own goals. She's an accomplished writer. She's an author. She is the podcast host of the award-winning podcast, No Guilt Mom Podcast. I mean, who couldn't be a more perfect guest to talk about this? She's a speaker. She appears in national media. She's the founder of the company No Guilt Mum. And her specialty is helping mums go from martyr to model, being the role model in her family versus sacrificing their own needs. Her coaching program, which is Balance, has helped hundreds of women find what lights them up, form a deeper relationship with their families, and release their own mental load. JoAnn is a former elementary school teacher with a master's degree in education, as well as a national board certified teacher. She is a mum of two kiddos, age 15 and 10, and she's been married to her college sweetheart, Josh, for 17 years, and they live in Gilbert, Arizona. So now it is time to welcome JoAnn to the Soaring Child podcast. JoAnn, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me here. I was like, I heard that 17 years. I'm like, whoa, that's been a long time.
I hear you. Do you want to know how long I've been with my husband? Oh my gosh, I can't even remember now. We started dating. We're in 1998. What are we now? We're in 2024.
2024, yeah. I would say 2004. Like, I don't even put the 20 in front because
oh my God.
I'm totally like, I don't know what it is. I just have this block against years progressing. I'm still in the 2000s.
Oh, totally, totally. So I've been together with my husband for 24 years. I cannot believe it. So I totally get that feeling. I'm really excited to talk about this podcast. We haven't actually explored this topic yet, but it's so huge.
Yes, I love it because I feel like it also holds so many people back. This guilt and these feelings of shame where they're not real, but they feel like they're real. And therefore like we don't do anything to get past them. Mm-hmm. So I'm excited to dig in too.
Me too. So let's, start from where it comes from. Where do you see sort of mum guilt stems from?
So a lot of it comes from just what we see. Like we were raised in the 90s and 80s where all of the media that we saw, the television commercials, it was moms doing everything. Like they were doing all the housework in like the Dawn commercial. They were changing diapers in the Huggies commercial. And what were the dads doing? The dads were like the bumbling idiots in those commercials. They were the ones who had no idea how to do anything. And mom was just there to take care of it all. Not to mention that we also had this role model of like Claire Huxtable in The Cosby Show who did everything, kept a sparkling house and had this amazing, prestigious career, which we now know looking back, like that is impossible to do without the help. But that is what we grew up with. That's what we see is like we should be doing in our own lives. And so if we fall short of any one of those high expectations that we have for ourselves, we're going to feel the guilt and we're going to feel the shame.
Yeah, 100%. And, as I said, with my starting story, like I used to feel it constantly. And many of our listeners have a child who's struggling. And so probably the thoughts that are going through their mind and the things that they feel that they fall short on is probably even exacerbated even more.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I mean, when you have a child with challenging behaviors and children have challenging behaviors all the time, even if you're not dealing with neurodivergence or ADHD. There are things that set us off as parents. And it so goes back to how we view the situation. Like when you were saying, like, I love my child, but I don't like my child. Like I totally can relate to that because when my son was really young, to put it like shortly, I basically did not get a full night's sleep until he was 3 years old. Because he would wake up in the middle of the night and then he would refuse to go back in his bed and he would need me to kind of comfort him. And I wouldn't sleep well with him. And then on top of that, he'd have these huge meltdowns. Like we would go to a place, like in public, say it was a restaurant, and we would have to find the spot in the restaurant that had the least amount of noise. And if there wasn't a spot in the restaurant that had the least amount of noise, well, that restaurant, like we could not go to because it was just going to be a miserable experience for us all because he just did not tolerate the loud noise well. And you feel so guilty being mad at that and being like, oh my gosh, like child, like you say to yourself, just get it together. But it's so hard as a parent because we don't talk about it enough that is not our fault. A lot of the older generation, like they would say, oh, why can't you just make him do it? But it's not our fault.
It is definitely not our fault. I just want to completely, one of the things that I do on this podcast is I get sidetracked. And so
I do too. It's an ADHD trait, which I have as well.
I'm going to just, go on a tangent a little bit there. The one thing I used to say about my son was, look, at least he sleeps well and at least he eats well. Everything else during the daytime I can deal with, but if he can't sleep well at night, oh my gosh, I couldn't even imagine. So I was like, oh, thank gosh. I'm like, oh, I'm sorry that you went through that in 3 years of not having much sleep.
It's funny because you get used to it. And then when the sleep happens, you're like, it's a whole new world. I had no idea what I was missing. Like I functioned so much better. My mood is so much improved and it's all due to sleep.
And you think about that, like if our children are not getting the sleep that they need, if that can affect us so much, what does it do to them as well? Okay, well, let's move into some like practical things. What are some of those mental habits that every mom needs in her life?
I mean, when it comes to guilt, and especially what I have seen in moms, like when I work with my balance members, they are so hard on themselves. And I think as moms, like everyone is so hard on ourselves. We're constantly berating ourselves for like, oh my gosh, why didn't you do this, JoAnn? Or why didn't you wake up early and get your workout in, JoAnn? You're so lazy. Or I can't believe that you lost it and yelled at your child. Like all these things we say to ourselves that like we would not accept anyone else saying to us. But this constant like flow of just insults really affects our mood and really brings us down. So like the first thing I'd suggest is to start looking to see, what am I saying to myself? Like, how am I interpreting every situation that happens? For instance, on this past weekend, I went down to my parents' house, which is about an hour and a half away. And my nephew was spending the night, and he's 4 years old. He is very like active, very active. And he was like jumping all around. He was jumping on my son, and my son is 10 now. And my son was having a lot of issues with it. The noise, the being like touched and like climbed on all the time. And in those situations before, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't believe like I don't know how to control this child. Like I have all of these, like all this experience. I've been a teacher, I'm a parent coach, and yet here's this child like jumping around in front of me, jumping on my son, making everyone else upset. And I don't know the right thing to say to him. And I would give myself like a lot of grief for that in the past. But instead, now I notice it and I can stop it and I could say, hey, this is a really, really hard situation you're in right now. Like you're feeling some pain. You're feeling challenged. You're feeling like you're not enough, and you're feeling a lot alone in this situation. And a lot of other people would feel the exact same way in the same situation. So it's okay if you just sit here and you observe, or if you like take your son to another room and cuddle him while the other adults deal with this crazy 4-year-old. And you don't have to put yourself in this. And that's what I did. And I think that if we can look to like see what we're saying to ourselves, and instead of criticizing, what I did there is I gave myself self-compassion. I acknowledged the pain. I noticed that other people like who were in my same situation, they would probably be feeling the same way I was. So I didn't feel as alone in that moment. And then I gave myself permission to comfort myself. So if we look at what we say and we give ourselves that self-compassion and make it a practice, that is such a big help against that guilt that we feel every day.
100%, because that internal dialogue really drives a lot of the output that comes out of our mouths and comes out of our actions. And, we talk a lot about, in my business, in working with families, we talk a lot about how we react in the moment when our child is having a meltdown. And, when we act a certain way, that then shows our child that it's okay to act that certain way. And so if you can just kind of take a step back, have that internal dialogue with yourself, calm yourself and detach from the moment, it's game changing.
Absolutely. And it takes a while to be able to do that too, because I mean, this isn't just something that you can take from the moment. Like if you're feeling that in the moment, you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to do this self-compassion thing. Like usually we're so amped up and we are so like angry and agitated that we cannot access that logical part of our brain in the moment. So I don't want anyone listening to give themselves grief about not being able to do this right away in the moment. But
do
how
not feel guilty. Do
not feel it's like one of those things. Like, have you heard of that study where they like give people a drawing task, but they're like, well, whatever you do, don't think about that white bear. Don't think about the white bear. And what happens? All they can think about is that white bear. They can't get the white bear out of their mind.
Yes. Yeah. Because we are here talking about how mums can overcome mum guilt. So we are not wanting to give you any extra guilt. I mean, I find that if like my emotions are really getting the better of me, I just step away. I just take a breath. I bring myself back into where I need to be, and then I'll go back and deal with the situation.
Yeah. And something really cool that helped me really figure out like what to do in the situation and to get that bearing back was after it happened. So say something happened, I reacted a certain way. There was something going on there that I wasn't conscious about in that moment. This is a technique taught to me actually by a therapist many, many years ago when I was going through some postpartum depression. And it's where, you know, that time where you could be completely happy and then something happens and you're not sure what happens, but your mood totally changes and you start being really down and really depressed on yourself. That's like a trigger. Something triggered you. And to be able to figure out those triggers more in the moment, a really great practice is to journal about what happened. So going back and being like, okay, here I was really, really happy. So what happened right before I snapped? What did my kid do right before I snapped? Oh, my child, like I'm just thinking of a situation that was happening with my son when he was 2. My child decided to take my glass of wine and pour it over his head and then go open the oven while the heat was still on. Like he was crazy. He was so crazy. I have a picture of this. This is great. And then once I realized, okay, well, that was my trigger. Okay, well, what did I tell myself at that moment? And usually that is where the good stuff comes in. Because at that moment, I'm like, my gosh, I'm such an irresponsible mom. How could I be drinking wine around my toddler? Of course, like this would happen. No. I know, but that's the kind of thing that comes in. And once you realize you're telling yourself that, you're like, okay, well, what kind of feeling did that give myself? Oh, that brought on a lot of guilt and a lot of shame right there in that moment. And then the next question is really powerful. What could I say to myself instead? And I could say, you know what? 2-year-olds are crazy. They're crazy. They're everywhere at every time. It is impossible to keep like exact track of it. He's alive. He's okay. Other moms deal with this too. This is hilarious. And then you ask yourself, okay, well, how do I feel that way? And when I think of that, the emotion that comes up is like, it's kind of funny. And 2-year-olds are crazy. And I'm going to have a great story to tell later. And going through that journaling process, that was the key to then making myself realize more in the moment when I get triggered, because automatically my thought process goes to, wait a minute, I'm getting triggered in this moment right now. And your brain starts going through the process and you're like, what can I tell myself? And that's how you get your in the moment action, is just looking to see, like doing your reflections at first, and then you're going to see some progress and improvement, like actually in the moment.
I think that is a gold piece of advice. And, you know, I find that when we're trying to change any type of internal conversations, when we're trying to change any behaviors of our children, when we're trying to change diet, when we're trying to change anything, consistency is the key here. And so I love the idea of the journal because, you know, if you do that every time you get triggered, you're doing it consistently. You're doing it. And then so your mind will automatically go to, okay, what triggered me, instead of just being triggered. So really about setting up that, even in a daily practice, you know, what is it, 21 days it takes to bring in a new habit. If you were doing that on a daily basis for 21 days in journaling, you know, when you were triggered, when you were happy, all those sort of things, that can definitely, you know, progress that forward in making that just an instinctual thought process when you are triggered.
Yeah. And like, I would even say like, moms that I work with really have a hard time with the word consistency, because that is something that we beat ourselves up about so much. Like, how many times have you said, oh, if only I was consistent, I would have gotten this, you know? So it's like, it's an imperfect consistency when you talk about this.
I like that.
It could be like, you know, what I tell our members is that we're doing a challenge right now where it's a 30-day challenge and you're trying to journal for 30 days. And I'm like, you know what? If you skip a day, that is totally okay. The thing we're looking for is that you come back after you skip it. You don't say it's a total wash, but you come back and you just do it again the next day. And that is really how to be consistent.
Yeah, I love that because I like that imperfect consistency. I think I might steal that one.
I just made it up right now, actually.
Oh,
So
fantastic. You need to use that on a social media quote.
I need a social media quote. Making note now. Imperfect.
Imperfect consistency. So we have, changing that internal dialogue, and the way that we can start doing that is that journaling. What else? What other amazing tips and tricks do you have for us surrounding that mum guilt?
Well, I think a lot of the guilt also comes from trying to do it all and trying to do everything. Because I know that when we live in a family, and I mean, I have a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old who have been doing like household chores since they were like 5 or 6.
Mm-hmm.
Again, imperfect consistency there. It is not a perfect system. But so often when we have issues asking for help, huge issues asking for help, so much so that we would rather do it ourselves than ask for the help in doing it. Because you always, and like, I always picture, oh my gosh, this person is going to think I am the most demanding like individual in the entire world. Or like my kids are going to think I'm nagging them, and then they're never going to want to be around me. And then they're going to just move out of the house. Like I could snowball real fast here, like real fast. And so you think that it's just easier if I do it myself. But really, that is what is contributing to our guilt and stress. Because then we take on all these things and then we see all these like tasks in the house that aren't done and blame ourselves for not getting them done. Like I was just watching an Instagram the other day where a mom influencer put a time lapse video of her cleaning and decluttering her entire kid's room. And I was like, oh, did they love it afterwards? And she responded, she's like, well, my daughter thanked me, but my son really didn't notice. And you get those instances. And so what instead I suggest is delegating the work in the house. And this doesn't come alone. This starts with if you have a parenting partner in the home, a spouse, a husband, a partner, having that conversation with them, sitting down and being like, hey, there's a lot we have to get done in the house, and I'm feeling really overwhelmed. How can we split this up so that we get what needs to get done and we are on the same page? And so you don't have to come to that conversation with any sort of like ideas or notes or like jobs for your partner. If you come to it on a level playing field and it's like, here's the work, how do we split it up? It will create this great conversation. Because if you have another adult in the home, in addition to yourself, there is no reason you should be doing all the work. No reason. In fact, a lot of stay-at-home moms push back against this and they're like, well, it's my job to be in the home. It's my job to take care of the home. And like my partner goes out to work and brings in the money. No, time is equal. If your partner's coming home and sitting on the couch and relaxing and you're here still running around cooking dinner, that needs to change because both of you need that equal time to rest, relax, and recharge. So 100%, right? And the best thing to do is to talk, split the chores up, and then make sure to write them down. Make sure to write down who is in charge of what in your house so that you know what you can let go of and what your partner is responsible for.
Yeah, I have a great. That is a game-changing conversation. I remember having that conversation many years ago when my kids were little. I've got a 10-year-old and a 14-year-old, so very similar ages.
Yeah.
And I remember actually we sat down together and we listed out every single thing that we have to do as a family and then divided it. And to this day, we pretty much still follow that same list. I mean,
yes, us too.
Yeah, all these years later. But the great thing, as you mentioned, we have now integrated the children and their chores into that. I looked at the things that I don't like to do. One of those is school lunches. I don't make school lunches anymore.
No school lunches. Not for 10 and 14-year-olds. No.
Yeah, my kids do their own school lunch every single day. And I have to say, Best decision ever. We know that like having a child with ADHD, that you haven't been able to sort of reduce those symptoms as yet. And a lot of the families listening today might be in that scenario. So like, what do you sort of see the struggles of having a child with ADHD and as it relates to like the expectation of chores?
Yes. Well, anyone with ADHD, they're motivated by stuff that they want to do.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you want to do it, you can have the best focus in the entire world. But if you don't want to do it, you will push that off and push all the excuses like everywhere. So one of the great things about like having chores for kids, it's like a great tactic to use with any child, but ADHD, this works particularly well, rather, is giving them choice about what chores they want to take on. Like it's not an option not to do any chores. You have to pick the ones though that you're going to do, because that choice involved is going to motivate them more than actually like being on them and nagging them. Also knowing what your child's motivated by. My son, he loves being on Minecraft, and we have the screen time on a program. It's called like Microsoft Safety,
yes,
where we can like set time limits.
Yes. That's so funny. I just finished a podcast interview like right before I jumped on with you, and we were just talking about technology and those screen time limits. So
yes,
we're diving into it's definitely a hot topic at the moment.
It's actually like it could work to our benefit though, because like I don't believe in using it for punishment. Like we never take away screen time or anything like that. But we do have a set amount of screen time he gets per day per the app. It's like an hour per day. And when he wants more, he asks us for it. But this is where the great part comes in, because he'll ask us for screen time, and all I have to do is look over the kitchen counter and I'm checking everything he has to do. And we're at the point now where I'm like, I look over, and just last night he's like, okay, after I put away the dishes and take a shower, can you give me more screen time? I'm like, yes, I can.
Love it.
But using things like they're motivated by and tying it to getting the work done works really well too.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the takeaway from that, little bit of that discussion is that you do not need to do everything in the house, mom.
No. And like the hardest part though with mom guilt is that you will see the chores that are not done and you'll be like, oh, I want to do them. I really want to do them. Like I see how stressed they are with schoolwork maybe, or maybe it's your partner and you're like, oh, like I have extra time. Isn't the nice thing to do to just do it for them? And those are all going to go through your head. And the thing is it's never going to fix the situation if you don't let people experience the natural consequences for not getting the chores done. I mean, just a few months ago, we have a dog who we were talking about before we started the recording, who likes to get into everything. She likes to get into everything. And one of my husband's jobs is taking out the trash. And we have one of those under the counter trash bins. So like you push it in, you pull it in. Well, when it gets too full, it's totally impossible to stuff anything else in that trash bin. And so we start stacking it on top of the counter, like above the trash. And we had tacos one night. My son didn't eat all his taco, so he puts it in the bag, puts it on the counter. And the next morning, I come out to the kitchen and I'm like, where's the dog? Like the dog's usually right here asking me for her food, like following me around, wanting me to feed her. And I walk into the living room and there's the dog with like piles of trash all around her, digging through that taco bag. There's like chicken over here. There's a taco shell over here. There's like shreds of paper. Like she had gotten in the trash on top of the counter because my husband did not take the trash out the night before. And honestly, like before I would have cleaned it up and then I'd be really pissed off at my husband the rest of the day. Instead, I look at it. I'm like, well, this is a natural consequence. And I go to my husband and I'm like, so the dog got in the trash last night. And he's like, oh, and I want to go take a walk. And I did. And he went in and cleaned up the trash. And it's just one of those things where our guilt will make us want to pick it up And the question I always ask myself is, am I going to be resentful and angry if I do this right now? And if the answer is yes, then I don't do it and I let natural consequences take its course. And that just stops the guilt process right there. Because would you rather like do the chore and alleviate your guilt but have this resentment and anger? Or would you rather not do the chore and have no resentment and anger for your family? And I always choose the second one. And it's been so much better because of it.
100%. And so what the learning for me out of that one is that even your husband can have natural consequences.
Oh yeah, definitely.
I am actually going to be taking that one on board and implementing that in my household, because I think another part of that is like, yes, we have that like, oh, maybe I should just do it. A big one for me is like, it's not done the way that I would do it. It's not done up to the standard. You have just got to let that one go. And no one's going to do everything the way that you do it. And when you adjust your own internal expectations on that, it's freeing.
Yeah. And like my first question is, where does that standard come from?
Probably like from what mums, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah. And when we ask ourselves that question, it's like, well, where does that standard come from? And why do I believe it's right? You might figure out that, oh, wait, like I always got yelled at for like, for instance, the bathrooms. I always got yelled at for not cleaning off the bathroom counters at home. And this is how I feel like the bathroom counters should be clean because I always got in trouble for it. Mm-hmm. So when you look at it that way, you're like, oh, well, maybe this isn't like right. It isn't an important enough issue to keep fighting over it. And I should just let it go.
Look, I think that a lot of these lessons that you've shared with us today have really, looked at how that sort of internal critic inside your body can, really change how you feel about life, your happiness and things like that. I know you talk a lot about joy and talk a lot about, mums finding that joy. Can you just share some of that and some of that with our listeners?
Yeah, like so often we put our own like needs and our own wants on the back burner because of our kids. And a lot of us are people pleasers. Like a lot of the moms I talk to, they will not do something unless everybody's on board with them doing it. And I don't know about you, but like my kids never want to go to the restaurant I want to go to. If they want to go and take a hike, they hate hikes. They don't want to go hiking.
No, they do not. Mine don't either. We had actually, it's so funny that you bring that up right now because we had to go out on the weekend and to do some, errands around. And my younger son goes, "Where are we going?" And I said, "We're going hiking." Anyway, that like ended in him like screaming and crying, "I want to go hiking." It's so funny that you say that.
Oh my gosh, I tried to like sell it for so long. I'm like, we're going on a nice walk. They're like, is it a hike? I'm like, it's a walk through the mountains. It's a nice walk. But like, they don't want to do anything that I find like personally fun and adventurous. Like, especially if I try to sell it to them, like it'll be so much fun. Like, no, they'll push back even harder. So it is so like important that we find that time away from our kids and away from even sometimes our partners to go and pursue those things that like make us us. And the best way I found is like, what were you doing before kids? What were you doing for fun before kids where like now you're just not giving yourself the permission to do it? I was a big runner. I wasn't even a runner when I was a kid. Like, honestly, like I turned 21 and I'm like, I think it'll be fun to run a marathon. And I just decided to sign up for marathon training because that's my impulsive personality. But I found that the people I met there and the whole like athletic environment, I loved it. It's me. And it's something that I have been not doing for so long because of the amount of time it takes. The time it takes away from your family, the time you're having fun with other people where you're not there serving your kids. And when you think about it in that way, you're like, wait a minute. And am I expected to serve my kids the next 18 years of their life and always be available and always be there for them? I mean, no, they need to go see you having fun and experiencing life. And it was just like illustrated for me this past weekend because I ran an ultra relay, which it was a team of 10 women. And altogether, it was 55 miles, but I only had a 5-mile leg of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it'd been so long since I've been in that environment with other athletes cheering each other on, with food being like a really good thing and not like a restrictive thing, like so many people talk about. And just like pushing your body and feeling so good afterwards and in so much pain as well. That kind of go hand in hand in running. It's like this weird obsession thing. Yeah. But like, I felt so much joy and so much love too for my family when I came back for like that time I spent away from them, that now I'm going to go and join a local running group because I've missed it so much. And I'm super excited about that.
That's amazing. So definitely, the takeaway I think from that one is do something that brings you happiness and joy.
Yeah, go try it again. Like you may think like, oh, I can't possibly enjoy it because I'll feel so guilty being away from my kids. But like, go do it and just see how you feel afterwards, because that guilt is probably going to appear, but it's not going to be something you can't handle, because guilt never goes away. You just get better handling it and figuring out how to get around it.
Well, I think that is a perfect way to end today's podcast. JoAnn, this has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining me and sharing all of this amazing information for our listeners. Please tell listeners where they can find and follow you online.
Yes, go to noguiltmom.com and subscribe to the No Guilt Mom podcast. We have episodes every Tuesday and Thursday that I do with my best friend, Bree, and we just have a ton of fun. So come and connect with me there.
Fantastic. Now, listeners, if you found today's episode or our podcast in general helpful, we would be so appreciative if you could leave a review and really share your thoughts about our podcast, your feedback. It not only helps us improve, but also spreads awareness and support with our amazing ADHD community. Now, listeners, remember that while mum guilt, it's definitely a common experience. And as JoAnn just shared, it's something that you will continue to feel. You just learn how to deal with it better. It doesn't have to define your journey into parenthood. You are doing an amazing job. It's okay to give yourself that grace, that kindness that you probably are offering everyone else but yourself. Remember, you are not just good enough. You are the perfect parent for your child. Listeners, thank you for tuning into this week's episode of The Soaring Child. I'm Dana Kay, your ADHD health practitioner. Keep on thriving. Thank you for listening to the Soaring Child podcast today. To learn more about how to help your child with ADHD soar using natural strategies, visit our website at ADHDthriveinstitute.com and follow us on social media at ADHD Thrive Institute.